Greetings, viewers. EricTheCarGuy here, back again with another show where I answer your questions here live on Google+. This will be show number 21. We've been doing this for a little bit now. First, I'd like to thank you for watching. Let's see. This is the show where I butcher your names and answer your automotive questions. Sometimes I have trouble reading your names, and I apologize in advance for that. Questions that are posted to the YouTube video will not be answered. I can't see those while I'm doing the event. Also, questions posted to the Google Plus page after the event is over also won't be answered. However, if you're watching the show live, you still have the opportunity to post the questions then. I didn't get to as many questions last time, and I'm going to do my best to try to get to more questions this time, so we'll work on that. However, if I don't get a chance to answer your question today, or you have automotive questions, I always encourage you to go to EricTheCarGuy.com. It's available for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And there's a welcome video to tell you about all the amazing features we have there to help you with those automotive questions should you have them and should I not get to them today. And if I don't get to them today, the next show will be on July 2nd, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard, and we'll take it from there. So I'll do my best to try to answer as many as possible, but please keep those restrictions, if you will, in mind. Let's see, do I have anything else to cover? No, I don't. I actually did a good job this time. Yay. One more thing. Like my shirt? Yes, these got shipped out, was it? Yeah, it was earlier this week, late last week. Somewhere in there I saw some of you posted pictures of them to my social networks. Thank you. These are no longer available, but we may do this again at some point in the future. But these, like this, they're here. And if they're not on you, well, you probably won't get them. But I just decided to represent today. Well, I've done enough introducing stuff, so how about we just jump in and start answering your questions, since that's what we're here to do. I will try very hard not to waste your time today. All right, we're going to start out with Sean Ryan. He says, Eric, I love your videos, have learned a lot, have helped me out on multiple jobs. My question is, I have a 1992 Civic VX hatchback with a D16Z6 swap. It's a project and a daily driver for me. The other day I was out driving and my idle was surging bad, going from around 1500 to around 7800. All the gauges read fine. I watched yours and Scanner Danner's video on the problem. Well, I have swapped the stock radiator due to a leak from dual-core aluminum radiator. Same brand silicone hoses a while ago. The other day I was driving home and the car ran great until I stopped at a red light where the surging idle would return. When I parked in my driveway and shut the car off, I could hear my coolant overflow tank bubbling. Let's see. To this point, all gauges were reading fine, but when I just turned the key to the on position, my temp gauge went straight to the red. I let it cool and added some coolant. What do you know, my idle stabilized and the temp gauge returned to normal. When I got to school on Monday, I did a coolant pressure test. At first there was too much coolant and it was leaking out the adapter for the radiator cap. After pulling a little out and redid the test, it held pressure perfectly. Also did a smoke test and went fine with smoke, only came out the normal spots like the air cleaner. Do you know where my coolant went? There were no wet spots anywhere like it was leaking, and no smoke typical of a bad head gasket. Can you help? Thank you, and stay dirty. Okay, Sean. Now, number one step, I've actually written extensively about idle issues, in particular Honda idle issues. There's an article on my website about this. Actually, something I should have mentioned at the beginning. I will put links in the description to many of the things discussed here and other additional information that could possibly help you, this being one of them as far as the Honda idle issues. One of the first things to check when you have an idle issue on a Honda is for air in your cooling system. You also said you did cooling system work, but I didn't see you mention anywhere where you bled the cooling system out after doing that. It is imperative that you bleed the cooling system out anytime you open a cooling system for repair, particularly on Hondas. If you don't, it creates an air pocket that could affect the idle. So you want to make sure that you don't have any air in the cooling system, and all the symptoms that you described there were like air in the cooling system. You had an overheat, you didn't have an overheat. This means that that air pocket moved to a different place and was no longer causing the issues that you had. So, like I said, I cannot stress this enough, and I talk about this a lot over my forum, and I also talk about it extensively in that article that I mentioned. First step, always check for air in the cooling system. You did good by checking for vacuum leaks. That was a good call. But the first thing to check is always for air in the cooling system, because any air pockets in that cooling system will affect the idle circuit. So in the future, take a look at that. And also, I have a video that goes along with the article and the link in the description that I'm going to post that shows you how to go through that procedure. Moving on, we have Benjamin LeBlanc. Hey there, Eric, longtime viewer here. I finally got myself a project. I picked up an 82 Kawasaki 305 CSR, fun bike, and got a great deal on it. The thing is, it hasn't been ran in 5 years. I got a new battery coming. I'm cleaning the chain and lube the clutch cable. I have spark plugs coming. I'm going to change the oil with Royal Purple and send some tank cleaner through the gas tank. What I need to ask is whether or not I can use PB Blaster or WD-40 on the cylinders so that the rings don't burn up. I was also wondering if I was forgetting anything. First of all, as far as the tank cleaner, I would remove that tank. I think one of the biggest problems, I had a Tom Burklow. He has a website, and some time ago I mentioned this, and he's really good with motorcycles. I wish I could remember his website right now, but anyway, we had a discussion about this, and one of the main problems with bikes that sit for a great deal of time is the condensation and the fuel and the gas tank. So one of the first things that you might want to do is remove that tank altogether, get it off there, because there could be rust and sediment inside of it that you don't want to send through the rest of the fuel system. You may want to have it sent out and checked, and not just the tank cleaner, but I mean, maybe pull it off, look down inside, that kind of thing. You may not be able to see all of it, but if you see a bunch of rust and sediment in there, that needs to be addressed first, or else you're going to be running dirty fuel through the system, and that's not going to be good. As far as PB Blaster or WD-40, personally, WD-40 is not my favorite lubricant, penetrant, that kind of thing. Not saying it doesn't have its purpose. It cleans stuff up really well. It does have its uses, but as far as a penetrant, I'm not really all that excited about it. In your case, what I would recommend actually is automatic transmission fluid. Automatic transmission fluid has a certain detergents in it and things like that. It kind of is good at this kind of thing. In fact, I believe you can make your own penetrating oil out of a mixture of automatic transmission fluid and acetone. I don't know the exact recipe ratios. I can't think of it, but I do believe I heard that someplace. I wouldn't use that necessarily because you could potentially wash down the cylinder walls, and you don't want to do that if you're starting it up for the first time. But a little bit of transmission fluid, a couple squirts inside the spark plug holes, and then turn the engine over by hand several times and make sure that stuff gets circulated in there. You could let that transmission fluid sit. If you've got stuck rings or something like that, it should help break them loose so that they can move better. That initial startup is the worst part, which is what you're addressing here. As far as I can think of, that's like one of the main things. Yes, having the new battery and like that, but I just did a video not long ago about cars that sit. Same is true for bikes. All the rubber hoses, seals, that type of thing. When a vehicle sits for a long period of time like that, those things tend to dry rot, shrink, and next thing you know, you've got a ton of leaks and a ton of things to deal with. So you may not be out of the woods. You maybe have got it at a good price, but you may find you're in there finding little fuel leaks, things like that, carburetors, all the gaskets and seals in there. You may find some issues there. Hard to say what you're up against, honestly. 5 years is a long time for something to sit and not run. But I would recommend a little bit of transmission fluid in the spark plug holes over anything else. And then, of course, make sure you crank the engine over several times, disable the spark, and see what you got. And also with the tank, very important, make sure that tank doesn't have sediment junk in it that's going to get into the fuel system and cause other issues. So good luck with your new purchase there. Who do we have here? We have Gabe Snowd. I believe I've seen you here in the questions in the past. He has a 2000 Honda Civic. Sometimes it has a few inches of play in the steering wheel, other times hardly any play. The play is happening more often, though. What do you think can cause this? Thanks, Gabe. Gabe, in that situation, it's not often that you have like something loose that's only loose sometimes. What I would advise is that you lift the front of the vehicle and give the wheels a shake, side to side, up and down, see if you can feel any play there, find any loose suspension components. In the case of steering, I would be looking in particular at the inner and outer tie rod play. For an alignment, you can't have any. For safety purposes, you can have up to 1/4 inch. Although I don't believe loose tie rods, inner or outer, would cause an intermittent problem like that. I think it's more likely that you have a problem with the power steering rack itself, and then there's play between the rack and the pinion. That sounds more likely. Like maybe the shaft is moving up and down a little bit, and the pinion gear might get a little apple cord, if you know what I mean. So you'll have some teeth that are making good contact, and then other times they're not making good contact, and you get some slop in there. Based on the sound of it, that's what you might have. Now, with Hondas in particular, you have to make sure you use Honda power steering fluid, or a power steering fluid that is approved for Honda vehicles. They have a specific fluid. If you don't use the correct fluid, it can cause all kinds of issues, including wear where you don't want wear. So once you get that all said and done, and you do find out that perhaps you have a power steering rack issue, that's what I would recommend that you do. So here we go, moving on. Brian CT, Eric, I've learned so much from your videos. I have a 1999 Accord V6, lots of Hondas today, and the power steering return line, not the feed line, is rusted out and leaking. I know I can unbolt it from the steering rack from above, but what's the easiest way to get to the line and remove it from all the clips, mounts, and hoses that it's connected to? Do I go from underneath or through the driver's side wheel? Both seem impossible to get to. Welcome to the world of auto repair, Brian. Impossible to get to? Well, that's kind of what special tools are made for many times. And other times, maybe lots of prayer. But in your case, many times I believe on that rack, I've replaced similar racks. It's underneath is where I get most of the things. And I would strongly recommend you use a line wrench on those fittings, particularly to break them loose, because if you don't and you round those fittings off, well, actually you're replacing the line, so that's not really an issue. But still, if you round off a fitting, you're not going to have a very good day. In fact, that'll probably make for a bad day. So keep that in mind. But I usually try to go from underneath, and in fact, at times I have loosened the bolts on the cradle underneath where the rack is actually fastened to try to gain better access to those types of things. You may also have to unhook the rear engine mount. Well, you don't want to do it. You don't want to get it way down. You just might need like half an inch. Sometimes repairs like this are a matter of a half an inch, and that's all you need. So you just want a little bit, but you can you can just drop the rear of it down. Don't take the front fasteners out, or else you'll have an engine and transmission on your head, and you do not want that. In fact, it's probably a good idea to support the engine when you start. But what I've done sometimes is knock those cradle bolts loose, sometimes wedge a block of wood up in there just to give me a little bit of extra room to gain better access in doing that. But seriously, be careful. That's a lot of weight, and if it's not handled properly and it comes out of there, it will kill you. So, seriously, take that under advisement, and good luck with that job. Let's see. Jose Lozano asked, what do I do if I know I have air in the AC system? Hearing a boiling noise after each time I shut off the truck while running the AC, and the problem started after I recharged the AC. 1997 Ford Expedition 4.6 liter 3-speed auto tranny, 147,000 miles. Noise after you turn the AC off is actually normal. The way your air conditioning works is that there's a pressure differential between high and low in the AC system. The high pressure exists on the outside of the system, basically where the condenser is and that type of thing. The low pressure starts somewhere near the evaporator inside your dash. So you've got high pressure going to low pressure for the AC to operate properly. That's how it works. It has to do with what's called the pressure-temperature differential. I'll post a link in the description to an article that I've written about AC that also contains some videos about AC and how it operates. But what's happening when you turn the vehicle off is the AC is no longer circulating, and as a result, that high and low pressure will equalize. And as it equalizes, you'll hear noise in the dash sometimes. Now, as far as charging the system, that may also come into play here. And that's a tricky thing, getting the right amount of refrigerant into a vehicle. And it's really tricky if you're a DIY, because most times you're using those little cans to get the refrigerant into the vehicle, and it's who knows how much you're putting in there many times. Whereas with a professional air conditioning machine, you can actually say put in 2 ounces, or just even less than that, a fraction of that ounce. So it's really easy to dial in a specific amount. Whereas if you're using the cans, who knows what's going in? A lot of people just put it in until it gets cold and they're happy and they drive away just because they have air again. I get it. But I'm just going to put this out there. I personally don't think AC work is for the DIY. There's so many things that are involved with it. as far as the skill set and the tools involved to diagnose and service it properly. Not to mention, in some areas, it's not even legal to do it without a license. So, it's a slippery slope with AC. I don't want to tell you not to do it, but I just, it's one of those things where you really have to watch out and really have to be careful. And it's really good to know what you're doing, because if you don't understand how the system works, you can't diagnose it and service it properly. Moving on, what do we have here? Hey, this moved a lot. As you're posting the questions, what happens is the computer screen starts moving around and makes it difficult to read. So I'm not saying don't post the questions. I'm saying that I'm just trying to keep up here. We have Carlos Nunez, Nunez, sorry. I told you about the name thing. Hey Eric, PO133, help. There's explanation points, lots of explanation points. I believe it's a Bank 1 oxygen sensor slow response. I've read that most of the time it's just a faulty O2 sensor, but it can be other things such as bad electrical connection, exhaust leaks, low fuel pressure. My question is, how do I go about narrowing down a list of possibilities, and how do I check for an exhaust leak? I know that some extremely noticeable because of the noise. Some are extremely noticeable because of the noise, but what about the very minuscule leaks? Thank you. Okay, well, let's start. First of all, I'm going to say, Carlos, well done, my friend. Well done, my friend, without just throwing parts at the problem. I like the way you think, my friend. I like the way you think. So well done on trying to diagnose the problem before you start throwing parts at it. We talk about this all the time in the forum. I'm not going to beat that horse to death. I'm going to answer your questions. Now, the first is, how do you go about finding small exhaust leaks? Well, it just so happens I've actually done a video about this. In summary, what you do is I take a shop rag usually while the vehicle is running, push it into the tailpipe and hold it there for as long as you can. Exhaust is hot, if you hadn't noticed. But what that will do, if you have any leaks in the system, it will actually force those leaks to accentuate, if you will. And it's good to have a buddy when you do this, because you can have them holding the rag in the tailpipe while the engine is running, and somebody can listen for leaks. So a good way to find exhaust leaks is that way. You basically just force those leaks to leak more. That way you can find those small leaks that you're talking about. Small leaks close to the O2 sensor would affect them in that sense. As far as fuel pressure, you check the fuel pressure and see if it's within specification. Also, you check for vacuum leaks. I've got a video on that as well. You can spray around the intake. I use carburetor cleaner, but you have to be careful because carburetor cleaner is flammable. On a hot engine, this could be a danger. You can also use water. Another method is to pump the intake full of smoke and look for where it's coming out. So there are a few methods as far as checking vacuum leaks, but that's something that could also contribute. But in my experience with slow response, many times it is the O2 sensor. And the way you can check this is if you have a scan tool with live data capabilities, you can actually observe the O2 sensor readings on that scan tool and in real time in most cases. And as you do this, you want to see the O2 sensor waveform switching back and forth between rich and lean. So if you're fortunate enough to have a scan tool, there's a lot of smartphone scan tools that are out there. A lot of people talk about the Torque app, that type of thing. But in fact, I've done a couple of reviews on these types of scan tools that hook up to your smartphone, and you're able to look at actual graphs, which are really nice. This is a nice visual as opposed to looking at numbers. What you're looking for is an O2 sensor when it's fully warmed up and closed loop for that sensor reading to switch back and forth between rich and lean, somewhere between 0 and 0.1 volts. However, newer AF sensors work a little bit differently, but still there's a rapid switching back and forth that you're looking for. So if you see an O2 sensor that just sort of stays at a certain voltage and only moves a little bit, that's a slow response. That's what it's seeing. And what you want to do is you want to maybe blip the throttle a little bit. You're looking for the O2 voltage to change as you do that. And if you blip the throttle and you don't really see the O2 do anything or the voltage really go anywhere, that's a lazy O2 sensor, and it's probably just dead and needs to be replaced. I will also add this. Do not use an O2 sensor socket or wrench to remove an O2 sensor. The main reason is an O2 socket has a slit in the outside of it or some way of passing the wire through the sensor so that you can install it. Now, if you try to remove it, especially old rusty, crusty O2 sensors that way, what will happen is because of that split, you don't have full force that's being transferred to the O2 sensor, and you run the risk of actually stripping it out, and you don't want to do that. That's for sure. So you try to use an O2 socket, and as you're putting torque on it, it actually starts to spread apart, and you lose grip on the sensor itself. What I recommend doing is snipping the wires, taking either a wrench, 7/8 is normally what the size is, either a wrench or a deep well socket, whatever you can fit on there, depending upon clearance. So they put O2 sensors in all kinds of places, and then breaking it loose that way. When you install the O2 sensor, use the O2 sensor socket. Most O2 sensors come with a little bit of anti-seize that you put on the threads. Real good idea for the next time you might need to take it out, because it is in the exhaust stream. So put a little anti-seize on the threads, enough to coat the threads. You don't want to get it on the sensing unit itself. You want to just get it on the threads, put it in there, tighten it down with the O2 socket, plug it in, reset, see what you got after that. Hopefully you no longer have that P0133. Moving on. Let's see. That's just a silly question, John. John Bickery, you know who you are. Let's see. And I'm just going up through these. Matthew McHale. Yeah, McHale. Eric, I have a mint condition 1999 Civic Si, and I just redid the poor work of the previous owner on the parking brake. The parking brake works fine and holds the car perfectly in a slope. However, it will not slow down the car significantly from speeds. Is this the way it should be? Does this meet proper standards? I need the car to pass a safety inspection soon. They are disc brakes. Thank you for adding that bit about the disc brakes, because that does give me an idea of what you're dealing with. The Civic of that vintage with disc brakes, I believe, has the parking brake assembly as part of the rear caliper assembly. So as you pull the lever, there's the pistons inside the caliper actually squeeze the rear pads onto the rotors to help hold the car in place. Couple of things here to answer your question. First, I don't believe that's really a part of an inspection. As long as the vehicle holds on a hill, it's not like you pull it up and you go skidding. And in fact, that rarely happens with rear brakes. Traditionally, the rear brakes are only doing about 20 or 30% of the work as it is, so it's hard to get them to lock up. I know in performance applications and people drifting and all that, they have a brake, and those kind of things are designed for that type of thing, for drifting. All you really need your parking brake to do is precisely what you mentioned, which is hold on a hill, which is what you said yours does. So, and also I will put out there that Honda rear calipers, particularly if they're not serviced on a regular basis, don't always work so great. However, if they're moving and functioning and holding, I'd say you're good. I would just leave it at that and be done with it. As far as driving down the road, trying to use it as a brake, as I said, you don't really have enough friction material in surface area back there to really do too much. Most of the braking is done up front anyway. So, unless you're out there drifting, I don't think you need to worry about that at all. So I think you'll be fine with your inspection. David Acker has a 1984 Ford F-150 with an old-style 5-liter 302 CID V8 carbureted engine. Yeah, old school. Well, 84. A lot of emission controls that got a little weird. It has the old-school distributor and high-voltage wires. Of course, the carburetor, there's no way to stop the fuel supply with the high-voltage plug wires. I can't disconnect those without risking serious shock to myself. How do I do a power balance test safely? Thanks in advance. Believe it or not, the voltage on that system is not as high as it is with newer systems. So it's not going to kill you, hurt you, that type of thing. It's very unpleasant, but it doesn't kill you, hurt you. However, to answer your question, there's a tool for that. And that tool is basically a plastic or insulated set of pliers, spark plug wire pliers, spark plug wire pliers. That you can use for that task that will make it so that it's non-conductive. So when you remove that plug wire from the spark plug, it's not going to go back through you to try to find the ground. Another way to do this is, like, after you pull it off, try to hold it towards metal so that the spark has some place to go. Coils don't really like to go nowhere with spark. That spark, once it gets out of the ignition coil, wants to go somewhere. As long as you hold it near something metal, it would rather go towards that something metal. So after you pull those plugs up off of the spark plugs themselves, like I said, with a pair of insulated pliers, or you can wear like a thick glove or something. That might also work. But the plastic insulated pliers Best way to go in this situation. Another little tip is before you actually start the test, go through and while the engine is off, and pull each one of the spark plug wires off of the plugs themselves and just rest them on the plugs. It'll still start up fine. In fact, if you're having trouble with an engine that's flooded, this is also a good technique because it actually sends a little more voltage there. The more resistance you can put in an ignition circuit, the hotter the spark is going to be. It's kind of a weird thing. In fact, spark plug wires have a calibrated resistance just for this purpose. So do spark plugs. I'm not going to get all into that now, but what I'm saying is you can start the vehicle just fine by pulling all the spark plug boots just off a little bit and have them still touching the electrode. That makes them easier to pull, so you're not like trying to fight them to do that power balance test. So hopefully that information helps you. So the solution to your problem, a special tool. Next, Chris Stanton, I'm sorry, has a 2004 Nissan Almera. Not familiar with that vehicle. I imagine you're in some other country. The front driver's side brake disc seems to have excessive wobble. If you grab it directly opposite the caliper, it seems that there's about ½ an inch of play when you pull on it away from the car's body. Hope I've explained that okay. I would assume that this is not normal. Any ideas on what needs to be tightened? Many thanks. Chris, first of all, sorry if I messed up your last name. This is normal. Many brake rotors are not fastened to the hubs that they're on. Instead, they're floating. So once you remove the wheel, you can actually move the rotor around, and be thankful for this because sometimes they rust onto the hub so badly you have to beat them off with a hammer if you're doing a brake job and you need to replace them. So the fact that you're just moving around like that is actually kind of a good sign. Once you fasten the wheel down, that rotor's not going anywhere because basically it's sandwiched between the wheel and the hub. So in other words, to answer your question, that is normal. If the wheel is off, you're going to have a lot of play in rotors of that type that are not fastened to the hub. Some rotors have screws that hold them to the hub. In that case, you shouldn't have any play. If you did have any play in that instance, I would say take a look at the wheel bearings because they may be the most likely cause in that instance, but also it could be tie rods, ball joints, that type of thing. But in your case, I think what you're looking at is normal. So I wouldn't sweat that. So if you don't see any screws or anything holding those rotors in place, then assume it's the wheel that holds it on. And like I said, I'm not familiar exactly with your vehicle, but I think that is, unless it's a Nissan Altima, and if that's the case, then yeah. I have typos all the time. Don't sweat it, dude. All right, next up. Ooh, we're getting tight on time. Let's see. Hey, Eric, do you have, this is February, by the way. Do you have any tips on replacing the rear engine mount on a 1999 Accord V6? Is this just a straightforward wrestle, or is there a trick that you could employ? Same as the power steering rack that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes pulling the cradle, the assembly that holds the front suspension, the engine and transmission, all that stuff up in the vehicle. Particularly in the case of rear engine mounts, you may have to do a combination of letting that cradle down a little bit and lifting the engine up a little bit so that you can get clearance in order to get that mount out of there. That one can be tricky, I think. I think it comes out the top, sort of front-ish. But as I said, you may want to drop the cradle ever so slightly in order to do that. You loosen the front bolts. You can take the rear bolts just about out, but as I said, you want to support the engine when you do this so that it doesn't come out on your head or anything like that. And also, like I said, put a block of wood between the jack and the engine because you don't want to put the jack directly on the metal of the engine. You want to be able to protect it. You can lift it up a little bit and also bring the cradle down a little bit between those two things. Hopefully you'll be able to accomplish that task. I think I got time for one more. We got Alfie done. Hey Eric, when I press my AC button on the dash, the light comes on, but nothing happens. My magnet on the compressor doesn't activate. What are the possible causes of the magnet not to activate? When I press both valves on the pipework, low and high, and good pressure seem to escape. I don't think I've got a leak. Thanks. Well, once again, I'm going to default back to my opinions on AC work in the DIY. There are several things that can cause that not to activate. It could be an electrical problem. It could be that you don't have enough refrigerant in the system. You may have enough to give the appearance of having pressure in the system, but it may not be enough pressure for the system to operate. So that's an important consideration there. So that is the most likely cause. However, as I said, it could be an electrical issue. It could be some other issue. I've even had to replace ECUs because the AC wouldn't operate. Everything else worked fine, but it turned out, after much electrical troubleshooting, to find out that it was actually the ECU that wasn't allowing the air conditioning to turn on. So it's a myriad of things that can come to play and happen here. I'm going to try to grab one last one. Aaron Bauer. Hey Eric, I have a 1998 Pontiac Grand Prix, and the power steering lines that go from one side of the rack to the other are leaking, and I cannot get to them to replace them. What do you recommend I do to replace them? I cannot afford to take it to a shop. Once again, getting clearance to those types of things is really difficult. So I'm trying to figure out if you're trying to replace the lines, can I not get them to replace them? You might try salvage, or maybe aftermarket parts will help you. Domestic vehicles actually have some reasonably priced aftermarket parts that oftentimes work out okay. Sometimes with imports, aftermarket parts in this instance don't always work. But once again, line wrenches on anything like that, or else you go to break something loose and it doesn't come loose. I believe I have a similar video, I think it was a 2000 Pontiac Grand Am or something like that, where I dropped the whole cradle out and had to replace the power steering rack. I'll try to post a link in the description to that for you so that you have some idea of what you might be up against. In fact, on that one, I think the weld broke loose on the lower cradle, and that's allowed the power steering rack to shift back and forth, which was not good at all. But I believe that wraps it up for this show, number 21. Had a good time, and I believe I answered more questions this time, and I'm pleased about that. Before I close this out, all right. Well, first of all, thank you for watching. But before I close this out, I want to give a shout out to a few people on the forum that are very helpful over there. By the way, like I said, EricTheCarGuy.com is where you go. One of the places you can go to ask automotive questions, if we didn't get a chance to address them here today, is over at that forum. It's open. All you have to do is have an email address to sign up for it. In fact, that's where I spend a lot of my time answering questions a few days a week. So, emailing me directly, that type of thing. If you want a specific answer to your question, head over to that forum. But I'd like to thank WiseTech. You're awesome, dude. Also, 13 Ace of Spades 13, Barney B, thank you. GR888, and I'd also like to thank both of my forum moderators, funny, College Man and Toyota Carl, for the work that they do over there to help you, the viewers. Actually, questions after the show, as I mentioned, that are posted, those will not be answered. Questions posted to the YouTube video will not be answered. So apologize for that. Head over to EricTheCarGuy.com to get those answers, in particular the forum. Those people there that I mentioned also there to help in addition to myself. Let's see. The next show is on July 2nd. So if we're going to do this again in 2 weeks. We do these every other week, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just like it was tonight. And links in the description to all the important little bits that I covered here, mentioned here, all that type of thing. So there's further information there. So it's going to take me a little bit to get that up. But if you're watching this video a little bit later, hopefully those links will be there for you. Anyway, I'd like to once again thank you all for watching. Let's see, how do I close my videos? How do I close my videos? You ought to know by now. If you have automotive questions, EricTheCarGuy.com. Welcome video tells you about all the amazing things. You can connect with me socially on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. Close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I will see you in episode 22, July 2nd. See you there.